Nagash, the undead skull daddy, the necromancer overlord, and the undisputed master of the dead. That's right folks, a fallen cow is finally stepping into the world of Warhammer Fantasy.
How long I've been waiting for this. Woo, I'm about to make a name for myself here.
Now I know what some of you are thinking. Wait, this isn't 40k, and yeah, you are right. But trust me, as someone who loves almost all things Warhammer, Fantasy is absolutely stuffed with power scaling potential. Gods walk the world, mortals throw hands with demons, and entire continents get reshaped because someone cast the wrong spell. If anything, Fantasy is one of the most unhinged settings to power scale, and I'd be doing a disservice by ignoring it completely. A quick clarification before the lore goblins come for my kneecaps, this video is strictly Nagash from Warhammer Fantasy, not Age of Sigmar. So that means for this video, we'll only be factoring in feats, statements, and abilities Nagash has from the old world. Age of Sigmar Nagash is a whole different beast, and trust me fellas, we'll tackle that monster in a different video. I plan to continue this series with characters like Archaon, Sigmar, Vlad von Karstein, and many more. So in honor of a fallen cow entering the world of Warhammer Fantasy, let's begin with a fun challenge. If this video receives 1,000 likes and 250 comments, I will power scale whatever the top comment says. So smash that like button, drop a comment with which fantasy character you want me to power scale next, and maybe, just maybe, they'll be featured in an upcoming power scaling beeps video. But today, we're covering the Bone Daddy himself. In typical fashion, we'll cover who Nagash is, his powers, weapons, and abilities, his most insane feats, and finally, how he stacks up against the rest of the Warhammer Fantasy world. Man, I'm getting shivers just saying that. It may be fantasy, but it's still time to power scale. Without further ado, herd, let's jump straight into the cow hole. It's time to power scale. According to the Rise of Nagash anthology, Nagash was born as the firstborn son of King Katept of Khemri in 2000 IC. Even as a child, he showed exceptional intelligence and ambition. Seeking power beyond the throne, Nagash joined the Nehekara mortuary cult, quickly rising to the rank of High Priest by the age of 32, the youngest ever. While other priests sought immortality through the gods, Nagash wanted it on his own terms. His opportunity came when a group of captured Dark Elder sorcerers grudgingly revealed their secrets. Through them, he discovered how mortals could harness magic directly, channeling pain and death to fuel spells, unlocking dark magic previously unknown to humanity. He eventually defeated these sorcerers, killing all three of them, beginning his journey on the road to becoming the Lord over Death. When Nagash's father finally passed away, the throne of Khemri went not to him, but to his brother, Thutep. Nagash, of course, had far bigger ambitions. One night, in peak Nagash fashion, he took the throne, buried his own brother alive, and ruled Khemri through fear and brutality.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
After surviving an assassination attempt by the priesthood, Nagash retaliated with a single spell that slaughtered nearly every priest in Nehekara. This act united the remaining kings against him, sparking the first war against the Nehekara kings. Though Nagash unleashed plagues, raised the dead, and caused literal rains of blood, he was eventually defeated and mortally wounded by primitive gunfire. Nagash's body fell, but his essence endured, which makes me really think that Nagash and Voldemort might be related in some way, shape, or form. They both do share the same title of He Who Shall Not Be Named.
Leave me alone!
There's a correlation to be made here, folks. I just don't know what it is. Fleeing into exile, he was transformed through warpstone exposure into the greatest lich to ever exist, vastly stronger, more durable, and no longer truly mortal, though twisted into a monstrous skeleton form. From his fortress of Nagashazar, he waged war against the Skaven, primitive tribes, and Nehekara itself, refining his necromancy further and laying the groundwork for vampires and other undead. At his peak, Nagash attempted the Great Ritual, a spell powerful enough to kill the living across Nehekara and raise them as his undead pawns. His plan was to reanimate all of Nehekara and conquer the world, and it almost worked. The ritual succeeded in killing every living being in Nehekara, but the only reason he failed was Skaven interference. God damn, those rats are tricky. He should have bought more rat traps, that's for sure. The Ratmen freed King Al-Kadazar and armed him with the Fell Blade, and in the brief window where Nagash was weakened by the ritual, Al-Kadazar was able to strike him down. But Nagash yet again would not stay dead. Yeah, I'm like 99% sure that Nagash is actually Voldemort. I mean, come on guys, they both don't have noses.
Coincidence? I think not!
Someone get Harry Potter and Warhammer Fantasy. We need him right now. Across centuries, he rebuilt himself using the Black Pyramid, returning stronger, waging war against Nehekara, the Skaven, and even the early Empire before being struck down yet again by Sigmar himself. And yes, folks, you're all correct. That was still not the end. During the end times, Nagash was resurrected once more and succeeded where he never had before, binding the Wind of Death to his will, becoming the living avatar of Shaiish. No longer simply a necromancer or a lich, Nagash ascended to near godhood, ruling through his Mortarchs, reshaping Sylvania, and standing as death incarnate. So as you can tell, Mr. Nagash here has died and has been revived many times throughout Warhammer Fantasy, which has resulted in various changes in forms and of course powers. And since this is a Falling Cow power scaling video, we will be covering as many distinct forms as possible. According to my cow calculations, there are 3 forms of Nagash across the Warhammer Fantasy setting. First, Human Nagash. Still mortal, but already incredibly powerful. As a high priest, he invented human necromancy, created the Elixir of Life, the 9 Books of Nagash, and the Black Pyramid. Even as a human, he is one of the most dangerous mortal sorcerers to ever live. His second form is the Great Necromancer, or Liche Nagash. Transformed by Warpstone, Nagash in this form has become immortal, monstrous, and vastly more powerful. This is the Nagash who built Nagash Azir, created vampires, waged war across the old world, and nearly conquered it through the Great Ritual. And his third and final form is End Times or Avatar of Death Nagash. By binding the Wind of Death, Nagash became the living avatar of Shaiish. He commanded the Mortarchs and challenged gods, heroes, and chaos alike. This is Nagash at his absolute peak. You could argue there's technically a 4th form of Nagash between his time as the Great Necromancer and his End Times ascension. After all, he's slain by Al-Kadazir, comes back, and is later put down again by Sigmar.
Were you killed? Sadly, yes. But I lived.
But honestly, I don't think that version is meaningfully different enough to justify its own form. If anything, the Nagash who fought Sigmar was weaker than his Great Necromancer form, lacking key weapons, still recovering, and nowhere near the apocalyptic threat he was during the Great Ritual. So for the sake of clarity and my own sanity, we're sticking to these 3 core forms. And oh boy, oh my, I am excited. Now that we know who Nagash is, it's time to dive into what actually makes him terrifying. Let's talk about his weapons, powers, abilities, and feats that set Nagash apart as the true master over death. Throughout his existence and across all of his different forms, Nagash only ever gains more power. More knowledge, more artifacts, and more control over death itself. So if we're going to be thorough here, and we are, it's important to break down each form individually and examine how his power, strength, and abilities evolve over time. To keep things simple and fair, we'll be evaluating each form of Nagash at the height of its power, regardless of age or specific point in the timeline. Before we get into the thick of this, we need to address a massive power scaling problem I didn't fully appreciate until I was knee-deep into writing this script. The Black Pyramid of Nagash. This thing is a nightmare to deal with from a scaling perspective. So much so that I ended up rewriting this entire section. Yeah, it did suck, but I'd rather do that than put out a sloppy video. So first things first, what is the Black Pyramid? The Black Pyramid is described as a colossal engine of death magic, capable of amplifying Nagash's spells to absurd levels and even regenerating him after death. He uses it to fuel spells that could wipe out entire priesthoods, continent-spanning rituals, and during the end times, it's even implied to push him into outright god-tier territory. The problem is, Nagash almost never actually keeps this power, which is truly a classic Warhammer trope. In the book, Nagash Sorcerer, he flees to the Black Pyramid after his physical body is destroyed, yet he can't even use it to save himself in any meaningful way. In Nagash Immortal, he performs his greatest ritual without relying on the Black Pyramid at all, and during the end times, he briefly gains god-level power by anchoring himself to it, only for Ikit Claw to blow the damn thing up almost immediately. So here's the question, folks. Does Nagash truly need the Black Pyramid? And if his most absurdly amped versions only exist for fleeting moments, moments that are never sustained, never stable, and never repeated, should we really treat that as his baseline? For this video, and I think this might be a controversial take, I think the answer is no. Hold on to your horses, let me explain. I know this may upset some of the fans, but hear me out. We will still factor in the feats performed while Nagash is empowered by the Black Pyramid, because ignoring them completely would not make any sense. However, these feats will come with an asterisk. A version of Nagash who has devoured the God of Death and is then sitting inside the Black Pyramid accumulating limitless power, only to leave for a single battle before the structure is destroyed, is not representative of Nagash's normal operating state. In other words, we're scaling Nagash, not Nagash, plus a temporary doomsday battery. When he's absurdly amped by the pyramid, it counts, but it does not define this form. With that out of the way, let's now discuss the few things that are consistent across all three versions of Nagash. Across all three forms, Nagash consistently possesses the following traits. These are his baseline constants, regardless of body, era, or level of power. First and foremost, Nagash is a genius. He is the true creator of necromancy, the first mortal to fully reject divine magic and instead manipulate the winds of magic directly, bending death to his will through knowledge, experimentation, and sheer goddamn arrogance. He has centuries of accumulated knowledge. Each time Nagash is defeated, he doesn't lose experience. He returns with everything he learned still intact, making every resurrection a net gain in power and understanding. He also has the ability to create new spells, rituals, and undead forms. Vampires, liches, and advanced undead constructs all exist because of his experimentation. And finally, Nagash possesses an obsessive drive to dominate death. Unlike other necromancers who bargain with gods or dark powers, Nagash seeks absolute ownership over death. This pushes him to accumulate more power and more knowledge to ultimately reach this goal. In addition to his innate abilities, Nagash wields a core set of artifacts that persist across all three of his forms, defining his power regardless of the version, all of which are detailed in the Undead 4th Edition Codex. First, of course, is the troublemaker, the Black Pyramid of Nagash. As discussed earlier, this colossal arcane structure serves as both a magical battery and a force multiplier, storing and amplifying vast quantities of death magic. Next are the 9 books of Nagash, massive tomes containing the foundational spells of necromancy. These books are essentially the blueprint for all undead magic in the setting and remain one of the most dangerous collections of arcane knowledge in existence. Then there's the Elixir of Life, a potent concoction that dramatically enhances regeneration, physical durability, and strength, allowing Nagash and those who consume it to survive wounds that would be fatal to ordinary mortals, recover from injuries at an extraordinary pace, and overpower mortal adversaries with ease. Finally, there is the Staff of Ages, later believed to have been called the Staff of Power or Al-Kanesh. To make things even simpler, we're just going to call it, throughout this video, the Staff of Nagash. It is said to be a smaller version of the Black Pyramid, created to store dangerous energies when Nagash performs his most powerful spells and rituals. And I will not lie, nailing down these specific weapons was quite the task, and it truly is a lot harder than 40k. With these weapons in hand, Nagash's power, already staggering on its own, is further amplified, providing the foundation for his most devastating feats. All of these artifacts are factored into Nagash's power across every variation. When Nagash gains an additional weapon, artifact, or construct in a specific era, we'll factor those separately when discussing that form's peak performance. With all of that established, herd, let's begin at the start. Human Nagash, or if you prefer, Base Nagash. This is Nagash before he lost his nose, discovered Warpstone, and became Warhammer Fantasy's most ambitious Voldemort lookalike. As a mortal, Nagash's magical foundation was built through direct tutelage from the Druchii, as detailed in Nagash Sorcerer. From the captured Dark Elf sorcerers, he learned a brutal, blood-fueled form of spellcasting, utterly alien to Nehekara tradition. Nagash absorbed their teaching at an alarming rate, rapidly mastering the principles of pain, sacrifice, and soul manipulation that defined Druchii magic. Within just a few short years, he had not only surpassed his teachers, but began integrating their barbaric practices into the sacred rites of the mortuary cult, twisting both magics into something new entirely, creating the lore of death, and then later, the lore of vampires. Nagash's growing command over dark magic is repeatedly emphasized in the book Nagash Sorcerer. His knowledge of their barbaric magic had grown in leaps and bounds in the 3 years since he had slain that hapless fool. The spilling of blood, the unwinding of a living spirit from its binding of flesh and bone, these things were second nature to him now. This reflects his early mastery of soul manipulation, ripping spirits from bodies, consuming them to empower himself, and using them as fuel for increasingly devastating spells. One of Nagash's most horrifying battlefield abilities was his use of summoned ghosts as living weapons. He unleashed his ghosts upon his foes. As the Vizier watched, the spirits wound around the shrieking men like snakes, pouring through their open mouths and into the corners of their eyes in search of their living souls. They left behind shriveled, smoking husks, contorted in poses of agonizing death. Despite his immense power though, Nagash Sorcerer also shows that human Nagash was not limitless. Extended campaigns and repeated mass rising of the dead could drain even his prestigious reserves, indicating that while his raw output was extraordinary, it still required careful management and preparation. That said, even in moments of exhaustion, Nagash's unholy abilities far exceeded what his followers or his enemies believed possible. Time and again, the dead rose from blood-soaked battlefields at his command, answering his will without hesitation. Nagash also displayed remarkable versatility with his magic. He could transmute objects and substances at will, most infamously transforming an enemy's noble wine into living eels that devoured the man from the inside out. Oh boy, that's gotta hurt. He commanded swarms of scraps dense enough to function as a means of flight, propelling himself across vast distances. These scraps burned out their own life force in service to him, collapsing lifelessly at his feet once their task was complete. And now that we've gone through the abilities human Nagash could wield, let's now get to his feats. As a human, Nagash's feats still place him among the most dangerous sorcerers to ever exist, which is truly saying something. First, he defeated 3 Dark Elf sorcerers in direct combat, surviving mortal wounds and extracting their knowledge to birth human necromancy. This was very early on in his sorcerer journey, so it can be easily reasoned that he only got stronger from here. Second, he successfully raised the dead multiple times across vast regions of Nehekara, proving that large-scale undead control was possible in his human Nagash form. But most importantly, with the aid of the Black Pyramid, and yes, this feat comes with a very, very large asterisk attached to it, Nagash unleashed a single catastrophic spell that annihilated every priest in Nehekara at once. In one act of sorcery, an entire religious caste was erased from existence, demonstrating the sheer scale of his power. Power built within the Black Pyramid as Nagash's incantation began. Every slave who died during its construction, more than 60,000 souls were focused by the king's fury into a single terrible spell. The shadow of Nagash's fury spread to every corner of Nehekara in the space of just a few minutes. Darkness fell across the great cities, and every priest or acolyte touched by the shadow died in a single agonizing instant. Only those who by sheer fortune were shielded by stone survived the lash of the Necromancer's power. Now, Nagash did do this. He did kill every single priest in Nehekara with a single spell. But, like we discussed earlier, this was due to the aid of the Black Pyramid, which channeled the power of 60,000 souls into human Nagash to complete this incantation. So using reasoning, without the Black Pyramid and without this vast quantity of souls, base Nagash would not be able to do this. So this feat, as I've said, has a huge asterisk attached to it. He additionally was shown to be able to create blood plagues that wiped out thousands within days, unleashed deathly shadows that killed anything they touched, and demonstrated the ability, given sufficient preparation, to expand these effects across entire realms. All of this was accomplished while Nagash was still biologically human. So in summary, human or base Nagash is already far beyond a normal mortal, physically enhanced by the elixir of life and capable of regenerating through sorcery. Intellectually, he is a once-in-an-age genius who founded necromancy, created entirely new lores of magic, and mastered rituals that can wipe out every priest in Nehekara. His powers include soul manipulation, necromancy of course, blood and curse manipulation, mind control, fear inducement, weather and disease creation, transmutation, energy projection, and direct power nullification.
I'm stronger, I'm smarter, I'm better, I am better!
And yet, despite all of this, he is still ultimately brought down by something as mundane as primitive gunfire.
What an idiot! Oh, what a loser!
This message was brought to you by the Cetra Gang. You know, Cetra, the Great King, the Imperishable, the Great King of Nehekara, the King of Kings, Opener of the Way, Wielder of the Divine Flame, Punisher of Nomads, the Great Unifier, Commander of the Golden Legion, Sacred of Appearance, Bringer of Light, Father of Hawks, Builder of Cities, Protector of the Two Worlds, Keeper of the Hours, Chosen of Petra, High Steward of the Horizon, Sentinel of the Two Realms, the Undisputed, Begetter of the Beget, Scourge of the Faithless, and many, many more. Because I want to remind you fine folks of just one simple thing.
Take in my majesty and quail, for I am Cetra the Imperishable. I do not serve, I rule.
But yes, back to Nagash. His body was destroyed and spirit scattered, only to be exposed to warpstone in the aftermath. And this is where we transition into the next form of Nagash we'll be looking at, the Great Necromancer or Liche Nagash. Now this form of Nagash is weird, and I mean that in the most Warhammer way possible. Liche Nagash's power is heavily dependent on warpstone consumption. And I'm not exaggerating here, this is a literal plot point across the books Nagash Unbroken and Nagash Immortal. The more warpstone Nagash consumes, the stronger his spells, durability, and magical output become. When that warpstone runs dry, his power begins to drain, sometimes rapidly. This creates yet another power scaling issue. Do we scale Nagash at his weakest, his average, or when he's absolutely juiced to the gills on fantasy ketamine? Oh my god, it's the Black Pyramid all over again. Why can't you just be normal, Nagash? The reality is that the vast majority of Nagash's greatest feats occur while he has consumed a massive quantity of warpstone. Which makes it only fair to power scale warpstone empowered Liche Nagash, and crucially, this is the exact opposite situation from the Black Pyramid. The Black Pyramid is a rare, short-lived external amp. It appears Nagash performs something apocalyptic, and then the Black Pyramid is either destroyed, abandoned, or removed from the narrative almost immediately. Warpstone, on the other hand, is entirely different. During Nagash Unbroken and Immortal, Nagash is consuming warpstone constantly, making it more the foundation of his power. Nearly every major spell, regeneration feat, durability showing, and large-scale necromancy act in this form happens while he's sustained by warpstone. Scaling him without it would be like scaling a demon without the warp or a wizard without access to the winds of magic. But funnily enough, despite all this effort it took to explain this weird power scaling issue, it's ultimately resolved by one of Nagash's most important creations, the black armor of Nagash. Once this armor was forged, Nagash no longer needed to constantly consume warpstone just to sustain himself. His power stabilized instead of bleeding away. But let's be very clear though, fellas. Every major feat before Morkan's creation still involves Nagash being absolutely coked up on absurd amounts of warpstone. There's no dodging that at all. So as we move forward into this variation of Nagash, just remember that most of the feats attributed to Liche Nagash are performed while he's operating on an utterly insane amount of warpstone. Morikane is just one of the many weapons and artifacts Nagash creates during his Liche phase. So let's go through them one by one, starting appropriately with Morikane. As the armor sealed itself around him, Nagash felt the change immediately. The constant drain of power from his bones slowed, then stopped entirely. The wind, unstable energies contained within the chamber's layered wards begin to flow towards him, sinking into the armor and becoming trapped there. With every passing moment, his strength increased, quickly surpassing that of any mortal being. Forged from an alloy of lead and meteoric iron, Morikane has fused with Nagash's body over millennia and can be worn by no one else. Crucially, it does not interfere with spellcasting. Instead, it acts as a stabilizer, preventing the loss of warpstone energy that previously caused Nagash's power to fluctuate. Additionally, it is shown to increase both his physical strength and durability. The next weapon Liche Nagash has is the Crown of Sorcery, which he created immediately after crafting his suit of armor. Forged by dark magic and infused with Nagash's necromantic essence, the crown would magnify his powers 1,000-fold. The crown directly amplifies Nagash's spellcasting, ritual potency, and command over undead forces. When paired with Morikane, it pushes Liche Nagash far beyond anything he achieved during his mortal life, allowing him to sustain prolonged, continent-altering acts of necromancy without collapse. Finally, we come to his greatest sword, Mortis, the Great Blade of Death. Mortis is Nagash's personal sword, a massive enchanted blade forged by his own hand. The sword enhances his already terrifying physical strength, allowing him to cleave through elite warriors, monsters, and champions with ease. But more importantly, Mortis siphons vitality from those it wounds, using their life force to heal Nagash himself. Against powerful enemies, this makes him brutally difficult to put down, as every successful strike actively restores him mid-combat. We see the blade's true power during the end times, where Mortis is shown to be able to withstand and trade blows with Kabanda, one of Khorne's most powerful bloodthirsters. So, those are all of Liche Nagash's armor and weapons. Let's now get to his abilities and feats in this form. Rather than listing every ability again, Liche Nagash represents a direct amplification of everything human Nagash could already do, but taken to a far more powerful extreme. He continues to absorb souls to replenish and amplify his power, command undead on a massive scale, fire devastating bolts of necromantic lightning that can no-diff Skaven warriors, and fight personally in combat with overwhelming power. His durability also skyrockets, and Nagash immortal, he survives direct magical impacts that would have completely annihilated any living being. The impact of the bolt spun the Necromancer half about and threw him to the ground. Such a blow would have turned a living man to ash. As it was, Nagash's spine and ribcage had been shattered, but he still lived. Even with his skeletal frame shattered, Nagash does not die. His connection to stored power is disrupted, but not outright destroyed. This shows that killing Liche Nagash requires either extreme anti-magic or specialized weapons. As for his best feats, this form of Nagash is able to cut through enemies with both magic and physical strength. The fight barely lasted a minute. One moment, Nagash was lost in an ecstasy of slaughter, and the next he was standing amid a pile of lifeless bodies. And this isn't an exaggeration either, because it's clearly stated how many Skaven he slaughtered in this battle. Does anyone expect me to believe that a burning man with eyes of Godstone killed 400 of our best warriors by himself? This excerpt from Nagash Immortal clearly shows that these were not slaves, these were elite Skaven warriors, annihilated through a combination of magic and physical combat. But folks, that's not all. I mean, it would truly be a sad day that I would have to sell Nagash being so almighty and powerful through a Skaven murder streak feat. Thank God I don't have to do that. At the pinnacle of his power, Liche Nagash unleashed one of the most devastating spells ever cast in Warhammer Fantasy. He unleashed a wave of necromantic energy across Nehikara for hundreds of miles, killing everything that lived and raised the dead where they fell. As I discussed previously, his goal was nothing less than reanimating all of Nehikara as an unstoppable undead empire, led by him, and by all accounts, he almost succeeded. Yes, that's pretty crazy, but even more insane is this ritual did not require the Black Pyramid. Instead, Nagash constructed a vast tower atop a mountain, inscribed with ruins and a summoning circle of molten silver, proving that by this form, Nagash himself was the engine and did not require a massive amp from the Black Pyramid to kill every single living thing within Nehikara. What an upscale for my skull daddy. But even with these insane feats, Liche Nagash can still be killed, but only under extreme circumstances. First, Nagash is slain by Al-Qadazir, wielding the Fell Blade, a Skaven-forged warpstone weapon, so lethal it would eventually kill its own user. More importantly, Al-Qadazir is only able to accomplish this after Nagash had just completed the Great Ritual and killed every single living being in Nehikara when Al-Qadazir stumbled into his throne room. Catching the Great Necromancer at his moment of weakness, Al-Qadazir first severed one of Nagash's hands, then bisected the Necromancer, and with his last bit of strength, Al-Qadazir decapitated the Great Lich. Thus, the Great Necromancer was slain, though only because he was vulnerable at that moment. Ultimately, as you all know, Nagash would return yet again, this time only to be slain by Sigmar. This is Sigmar in his prime, as before facing Nagash, he slaughtered hundreds of skeletons, and the book, God King, literally calls him that guy. I'm not kidding, look. It says, in this world, at this time, Sigmar was that man. The duel between Nagash and Sigmar was intense, with Nagash unleashing blinding sorcery and apocalyptic magic, able to lay waste to battlefields, while Sigmar relentlessly struck back with Galmaraz, dodging, countering, and even managing to shatter the Necromancer's staff. All of this happens while Sigmar is actively resisting the Crown of Sorcery, a potent artifact we covered earlier, that is trying to bend him to its will, yet paradoxically, also protecting him from Nagash's magic and allowing him to cut through the ranks of the undead. Ultimately, the only true way Sigmar is able to defeat Nagash is through deception. Sigmar tricks Nagash into sacrificing himself to attempt to retrieve his crown, which makes Nagash not look like the smartest sorcerer in the setting, but actually a literal brick wall. I'm gonna read the excerpt right here just to show you how stupid Nagash looks. Nagash reached for the crown with outstretched fingers, all thoughts consumed by reclaiming it. Nothing else mattered, and it was at that moment Sigmar had been waiting since the fight had begun. He leapt towards the Necromancer, swinging Galmaraz in a thunderous overhead sweep. The mighty dwarven hammer smashed into Nagash's cuirass, shattering it into 1,000 shards and driving deep into his chest. The Necromancer shrieked as his ancient sorcery struggled to resist the overwhelming power of the dwarfs. Forces too titanic for mortals to comprehend roiled within his body, capable of laying waste to entire lands. Sigmar held fast to Galmaraz as the star iron of its head burned brighter than the sun. So yes, herd, Nagash lost this fight. But not only does this excerpt from the book, Sigmar, the God King, say that Nagash's body had the power that should have been able to lay waste to entire lands, but this is also some Magnus the Red level context. Nagash was both actively healing and resurrecting every zombie during the battle, but was also fighting Sigmar at the exact same time, who wielded the Crown of Sorcery, which is set in God King to help protect him against Nagash's own magic. God damn, I think I found the next Magnus the Red. Wow, Warhammer really never changes. I mean, Sigmar even looks like Leman Russ. You can't make this shit up. How the hell is Nagash losing to Sigmar with this silly trick move?
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Regardless of this silliness, Liche Nagash represents the peak of old world necromancy, a being that can cast spells that cause mass extinctions and annihilate armies alone. But even this still wasn't his final form, because during the end times, Nagash would finally achieve what he had been chasing since the very beginning. He would stop using death magic and become death itself. Now before we continue, we need to address the elephant in the room. The end times suck. They make no sense, they bulldoze decades of fantasy lore, and they kill beloved characters in ways that feel less tragic and more we ran out of time and wrote this bullshit ending because we had to kill someone off to raise the stakes. We have the stupidity of Tyrion going on a murder spree, Malekith is suddenly the real Phoenix Lord, Alariel marries him for some reason.
It should have been me, not him! It's not fair!
And everyone fighting chaos is apparently incompetent as hell. And that's just the surface. Don't even get me started on everything else. And of course, as always, fuck you, Manfred, you bald loser.
Crazy dog.
Man, that nigga's loaded so bad.
With that little rant out of the way, as power scalers, we don't get to ignore it. Because End Times Nagash is absurdly powerful and pretending otherwise would be stupid. What's important to understand is that Nagash doesn't appear in the End Times fully formed, it's a slow evolution that begins with his resurrection, then next his ascension as an incarnate, and finally his apophysis through God devouring. Yep, the guy devours a literal god. Let's start with how he returned back to life yet again. Take it from the top, people, take it from the top. Attempt number 3. This time around, he was resurrected by Manfred and Arkin the Black, who used people with holy blood, such as Volkmar the Grim or the Fey Enchantress, as sacrifices to resurrect him, and amp him with godlike power. But during this ritual, it was revealed that the Everchild, one of the many sacrifices, who was supposedly the daughter of the current Phoenix King, Finubar and Alariel, the Everqueen, was actually Tyrion's illegitimate child with Alariel. Due to this, the ritual began to fail, and an ancient curse began to poison Nagash's new body. Instead of accepting defeat, Nagash channeled all of the magic he had gathered throughout the ritual into his staff, which he redirected into the land itself of Sylvania. According to the End Times Volume 1, this resulted in the whole province of Sylvania being torn apart by unstable magic, creating vast canyons all across the land and awakening the dead from generations past into unholy life. This was a part of Teclis's incredibly wild and almost incoherent plan to make Nagash work with the other Order races. Seriously, Teclis makes no sense at all in the End Times, which I'll have to cover in a different video. Still, Nagash was powerful enough to steal the Wind of Death from the Great Vortex and was already exerting influence over the dead across the entire world. Nagash let loose a pillar of darkness that pierced the sky and spoke the final words of power that would awaken the dead of the world from their graves. Across Uthwan, Nagaroth, Nehekara, and the Empire, the dead stirred. Seas blackened, ghost cities screamed into existence, wizards collapsed into dust, priests of Mor went mad, the dead everywhere began answering his call. This was ritual amp power, yes, but it still establishes that even without his later buffs, like consuming the God of Death and becoming the incarnate of Shaiish, Nagash was still operating on a planetary scale. Later, Nagash invades Nehekara and has fed thousands of souls, stated in the End Times Volume 1, to finally give Nagash back his diminished powers. After this, Nagash finally completes his revival and then somehow, yes somehow, becomes the incarnate of Shaiish, the Wind of Death. I'm not kidding, guys, the End Times never really specifies, unless I'm a blind bat, when Nagash officially becomes the incarnate of Shaiish. We know Teclis remarks that it has been stolen, but never says by who or when, except it was before the Great Vortex was utterly destroyed. My personal theory, and correct me if I'm wrong please in the comments, is that Nagash stole the Wind of Death during his resurrection ritual, but could not use its full power until he was fed thousands of souls, which brought back his diminished powers, and thus would allow him to use the strength of the Wind of Death. Of course, I could be wrong and spreading misinformation, but I swear to God I could not find anywhere throughout the End Times when Nagash specifically becomes the incarnate of Shaiish. Didn't I tell you? The End Times absolutely suck. But regardless of specifically where and when, Nagash becomes the incarnate of Shaiish, the Wind of Death, sometime after his rebirth and before his conquest of Nehekara. For those who don't know, an incarnate is a key part of the End Times lore, essentially a walking avatar of one of the winds of magic, created to fight chaos during the world's final days. Being an incarnate massively amps the spells and abilities tied to that specific lore. For example, the lore of beasts grants powers related to strength and the natural world, while on the other hand, the lore of fire allows one to become a living pyre, radiating heat and resisting harm from normal or fire-imbued weapons. Nagash, as the incarnate of death, gains immense magical power, unparalleled mastery over necromancy, and control over the undead, all amped by the power of Shaiish. What the hell, man? This is supported further by the End Times Volume 3, Cain, which states, "Even ancient and fearsome beings such as Be'lakor were but children in comparison." Let that sink in, folks. Be'lakor, the first demon prince, an ancient terror setting mainstay, is now a small fry by comparison. Even further, it is suggested several times throughout the end times that Nagash is the greatest and most powerful incarnate, as we see that when Nagash is taken prisoner by the forces of order, 2 other incarnates and a heavy escort of Sisters of Thorn have to guard him at all times. And somehow, this still isn't the end. Nagash goes on to confront Usirian, the Nehekara god of death. What follows is a god-level deadlock, a clash of wills between 2 titanic entities, with Dieter Helsnick, one of Nagash's servants, breaking the stalemate by binding every soul in the underworld and hurling them at the god of death, stunning him long enough for Nagash to land 3 decisive strikes. Then he does something completely unprecedented. He devours the god of death, which means the god of death is dead. What a catch-22, and Nagash rises in his place. Even accounting for assistance, Nagash was still engaging a god as an equal, and then he consumed it. This is where he reaches his peak, his zenith in this form, devouring the god of death, and redirecting the souls that would have found rest are now under his command. There is one final complication we need to address: the Black Pyramid. Yes, we talked about it earlier, but Nagash reaches a new height here, even beyond devouring a god.
Well, that's just silly.
He reaches this when he goes into a deep slumber within the Black Pyramid and absorbs an insane amount of dark magic, pushing him even further beyond his current state, which includes his status as the god of death. However, this amp is very temporary and explicitly removed when the pyramid is destroyed by the goat Ikit Claw. When that tether is severed, Nagash loses access to that near infinite reserve and returns back down to the power level of an incarnate. Oh no! My steak is too buttery. My steak is too juicy. He is still monstrously strong as both the incarnate of Shaiish and the devourer of the god of death, and possesses several powers and abilities that blur the line between god and mortal avatar. First, Nagash possesses absolute mastery over death and necromancy. Undead no longer need to be raised through rituals. Nagash can summon them directly from the underworld itself. Entire battlefields erupt with skeletal and spectral hands clawing their way into existence simply because he wills it. His presence alone causes mass resurrection events, raising the dead across vast regions without deliberate effort. Next, Nagash has soul manipulation, which arguably might be his most terrifying ability. Nagash can harvest, bind, consume, redirect, and weaponize souls with a gesture. This is not limited to individuals. Entire populations can be affected simultaneously. Souls empower him directly, allowing him to refuel mid-conflict, recover from damage, and amplify his spells. At this stage, death is no longer an obstacle or a boundary, it is a resource. Economics, baby! That stack's going to the moon! Third, as an incarnate of Shaiish, Nagash also exerts conceptual authority over death itself. His magic erases vitality, leeches life force, and overrides protections that previously nullified magic. Artifacts and blessings tied to death gods cease functioning in his presence, as demonstrated when protections that once shielded Cetra from all sorcery simply stopped working. Nagash also demonstrates extreme durability and regeneration. His physical form, though skeletal, is continuously restored through death magic. Even catastrophic damage is rapidly undone, his body regenerating during battle. He's also able to reform after physical destruction, as his true essence now resides within the realm of souls rather than his corporeal shell. He also wields immense destructive spellcraft, including death beams capable of disintegrating armies, ethereal scythes that annihilate dozens of war machines in seconds, wide area transmutation that turns enemies into ash, crystal statues or withered husks, amethyst fire and void-like darkness that annihilates demons outright. Finally, Nagash possesses near total magical dominance over Deaf-aligned casters. Any being attempting to manipulate necromancy, shaiish, or the realm of souls without his consent risks immediate backlash, ranging from insanity to outright annihilation. Death magic answers to Nagash first, and everyone else second. These abilities are also paired with his fully formed arsenal. By the end times, Nagash has reclaimed his lost artifacts, which function as a constant amplification of his powers, allowing him to sustain his god-level output without burnout. This includes the Mortis Blade, the 9 Books of Nagash, the Staff of Nagash, the Crown of Sorcery, and Mori Kane, the Black Armor of Nagash. Together, these artifacts ensure Nagash's power is self-sustaining, which, to put it in the most simple cow terms, makes him one broken motherfucker. Now, let's get to this form's feats, and let me say, Nagash has quite a few during the end times. Like I said, upon resurrection, he exerts planetary scale influence, awakening the dead across the world simultaneously. As the incarnate of Shaiish, he is stated to surpass entities such as Be'lakor, placing him above first-generation demon princes in raw magical output. Nagash engages the Nehikara god of death as an equal, fighting a prolonged god-level battle before ultimately devouring him with Dieter's help. He casually annihilates greater demons, including bloodthirsters, with minimal effort, reducing them to ash or crushing them through sorcery. Nagash also battles Kabanda, one of Khorne's mightiest champions, in a prolonged draw, showing that he can fight top-tier greater demons at their strongest, which I would like to remind folks that greater demons are a lot stronger in fantasy compared to 40k. He also defeats Cetra, overpowering ancient divine protections in the process, immobilizing him effortlessly, and ultimately killing one of the strongest figures in fantasy history, an encounter that simultaneously upscales Cetra while confirming Nagash's overwhelming dominance. What a guy. And even still, Nagash could not prevent Manfred from shaking guilt in the back. Now that we've broken down the 3 forms of Nagash, Human Nagash, Lich Nagash, and End Times Nagash, it's time to step back and do my favorite thing on this channel. Let's stack him against the rest of the fantasy universe, including kings, gods, demons, incarnates, to see where the great Necromancer actually lands when you put him on the same board as everyone else. And just like the great Anakin Skywalker said, this is where the fun begins.
This is where the fun begins.
Now, since this is Warhammer Fantasy and not 40k, that means we need a new Gauss Bauer Pyramid to help scale Nagash against the rest of the fantasy universe. This time around, the tiers have been updated to better reflect fantasy's characters and just overall scaling. Of course, we all know that 40k operates on a planetary or sometimes even galactic, cosmic, or multiversal level. While fantasy characters, even at their strongest, generally operate on a single world scale, maybe continental at their best. That means power scaling Warhammer Fantasy is inherently different, so we have to adjust accordingly. For Warhammer Fantasy, I will be using 5 tiers. First, we have Knight tier, the entry level of the End Times power spectrum. These are your basic, skilled warriors, competent fighters, but nothing beyond that. Think human lords, heroes, and standard champions, strong individually, but vulnerable against truly epic threats. Second, we have the Enhanced tier, a step up from the Knights tier. These are powerful champions with access to magic, mighty artifacts, or chaos buffs, allowing them to cut through dozens of normal file rank soldiers, but still limited to street level feats. Third is High Wizard tier. At this point, we're looking at characters with real supernatural edge, elf sorcerers, grail knights, and other elite entities who command either great physical or magical prowess and can devastate foes on a large scale. These powers can rival kings or armies, but city-level feats are still out of reach, but these entities are quite close. Fourth is the Greater Demon tier. These are the truly monstrous entities of the Warhammer Fantasy setting. Greater demons in fantasy are a lot more powerful than 40k. They are nigh immortal, possess vast magical and physical power, and can change the tide of entire campaigns. And then finally, at the top of the Warhammer Fantasy setting, we have the End Times tier. This is when characters are at their absolute peak. Their power scales dramatically here, allowing them to complete feats that are incredibly destructive on a continental scale. Now, I definitely can see the argument for adding another tier or two, so drop your thoughts in the comments on what you think would look better or make more sense. This is my first tier list for Warhammer Fantasy, so be gentle on my kind cow heart. These will only get better with time. With that out of the way, let's go through each form of Nagash, starting at the very beginning with Human Nagash, the Sorcerer Lord of Nehikara. Human or base Nagash is already a pain in the ass to scale because even before Lichdom, before Godhood, before any of the End Times insanity, he is still wildly powerful than most characters in the setting. I can say with confidence that Human Nagash is above basically everyone in the Knight tier. Imperial Captains, Bretonnian Knights, Orc Warbosses, Ogre Warlords, Orcathaean Generals. These are all strong warriors, but they would fare far better against the rank and file instead of a Sorcerer Lord of Nagash's quality. He would easily vaporize them with magic before they could even get close. He's also clearly above most of the enhanced tier. Chaos Champions, Vampire Lords, Elf Captains, and standard high-ranking spellcasters simply do not have the depth of knowledge or sorcery dominance that Nagash already displays at this stage. This is a man inventing necromancy as a discipline, manipulating souls, and outplaying entire priesthoods and dynasties through intellect and magical prowess. That being said though, folks, Human Nagash definitely has a ceiling, and I think there's a very strong argument that it stops at the High Wizard tier. This is the point in the scale where we start seeing genuinely named, setting-defining spellcasters appear. Characters like Arkan the Black, Balthazar Gelt, and the upper echelon of Elven mages, whether High or Dark Elf. These are figures whose magic can decide battles and reshape regions, even if they fall short of true city-level destruction. Arkan the Black is an especially useful comparison, because in many ways, he is essentially a reflection of Nagash's own magical philosophy, but much weaker. Even before Lichdom, Nagash's understanding of death magic and sorcery as a whole is deeper, more experimental, and more dangerous than Arkan's ever becomes. Arkan is immensely powerful, but his role is ultimately that of a lieutenant and a disciple. When you compare their feats directly, Nagash in his human form consistently comes out ahead in terms of innovation and magical destruction. Balthazar Gelt is another good benchmark, and while the memes like to portray him as absurdly overpowered, his actual feats are more grounded. Gelt is a highly skilled metal wizard, but his greatest accomplishment is not some apocalyptic spell. It's the creation of the Auric Bastion. The Auric Bastion is essentially a magically reinforced defensive structure designed to protect key Imperial holdings, combining alchemy, engineering, and sustained spellcraft. It's definitely an impressive feat of magical construction, but I still don't think it compares to Nagash wiping out the entire priesthood of Nehikara or raising the dead across vast regions. That alone pushes him slightly ahead. While they occupy roughly the same tier in terms of raw power, Nagash's breadth of knowledge, willingness to experiment, and highly destructive spells give him the edge. Because of that, I'd place Human Nagash at the very top of the High Wizard tier, right at the ceiling. Now I know some of you are going to see this and immediately think, wait cow, Gelt is definitely stronger than a greater demon, or Nagash in his human form should easily stomp a greater demon. Honestly, I would have agreed with you if it weren't for the actual feats of some of these greater demons like Kabanda, who was able to defeat multiple incarnates. And yes, I know this is a named Bloodthirster, so I guess his feats would be better than generic Bloodthirsters. But the fact remains, yet again, that greater demons are simply built different in Warhammer Fantasy compared to 40k. In fact, let's do a slight autistic deep dive into the greater demons. The Warhammer 2nd edition describes them as exemplifying the qualities of their Dark Masters, most closely resembling those traits and characteristics mortals expect to find in the Dark Gods. Their powers are beyond all others in the old world. They are capable of slaughtering armies on their own and can warp the very landscape with their presence. To know them is madness, to face them is death. They are chaos incarnate. That's straight from the 2nd edition, Tome of Destruction, and it makes it very clear that greater demons are the apex tier when facing base mortals or even elite mortals. I mean, spoiler, but greater demons like Kabanda, Karos Fateweaver, Scarbrand, or Nakari are end-time level entities. Not only are they some of the highest ranking greater demons within their faction, but they are also amped by the winds of magic circling the world due to the destruction of the Great Vortex. We'll get more into them in a bit. But all of this is why I'm going to place Human Nagash at the top of the High Wizard tier. It's not that Nagash in human form isn't powerful, he absolutely is. But the fantasy rules themselves and the scale of the greater demons indicate that against a normal mortal or semi-mortal spellcaster, they would come out on top, even if they were a generic bloodthirster, keeper of secrets, great unclean one, or lord of change. Next up is Liche Nagash, the great necromancer. And it's immediately clear that this form of Nagash is stronger than his human form in nearly every aspect. In this version, he commands vast legions of undead with ease, absorbs souls to replenish his power, fires devastating bolts of energy that annihilate even elite warriors, and personally cuts down foes with overwhelming power. His durability also skyrockets, even skeletal injuries that would obliterate a living man barely slow him down, showing that killing Liche Nagash requires either extreme anti-magic or specialized weapons. At the pinnacle of his power, he was able to slaughter hundreds of elite Skaven in moments, and even casted a continent-wide spell that killed all the living across Nehekara and raised them from the dead, all without needing the Black Pyramid as an amplifier. On top of that, he wields an assortment of powerful artifacts and weapons, each one amplifying his already staggering magical might. This combination of intelligence, mastery of death magic, and an arsenal of magical tools easily puts him above anyone in the High Wizard tier. Where here's Human Nagash was at the very top of that tier, Liche Nagash steps into a level of power that can threaten entire cities on its own, making him a natural fit for the greater demon tier. I just don't think Nagash is at End Times level yet, as he clearly can't straight up defeat Sigmar, who in turn has defeated 4 greater demons in single combat. Now, when we talk about the greater demon tier, as I briefly chatted about, we are mainly discussing low-level or generic greater demons like bloodthirsters, great unclean ones, lords of change, or keepers of secrets. As named greater demons like Kabanda or Karos Fateweaver are even stronger than these basic greater demons. But even the most basic greater demons are still some of the strongest entities in the Warhammer Fantasy setting. This tier also includes those that are capable of their destruction. Tyrion, Teclis, Vlad von Karstein, Manfred von Karstein, Kalidor Dragon Tamer, or Be'lakor, and those like them. What's important here is that Liche Nagash is the first form where he really transitions from being just a guy with a bald head into a region-level, reality-threatening force, setting the stage for even more ridiculous feats during the end times. So where does Nagash actually land when compared to the rest of the beings in the greater demon tier? Liche Nagash probably sits at the very top of the greater demon tier, claiming supremacy just like he did in his human form. He definitely outscales generic bloodthirsters, great unclean ones, lords of change, or keepers of secrets, as well as Tyrion, Teclis, or any of the other beings capable of defeating a greater demon. Nagash is simply too strong in this variation, his durability, regeneration, soul absorption, and has the magical output to level entire lands. He loses only to extreme counters like the Fell Blade while weakened, or Sigmar getting bailed out by trickery, and even then, he is never casually defeated. The narrative treats him as a world-ending threat rather than a powerful villain, which places him above nearly all mortal champions and firmly above everyone in the greater demon tier. Then, the end times happen, unfortunately. But power-wise, this is where Nagash becomes truly absurd. Upon his resurrection, Nagash is already exerting influence over the dead across the entire world, awakening corpses across Ulthuan, Nagaroth, Nekrahara, and the Empire simultaneously. This alone establishes planetary scale, necromantic reach, even before his later evolutions. After stabilizing his form through mass soul sacrifice, Nagash ascends further and becomes the incarnate of Shaiish, the Wind of Death. And if you don't remember, incarnates are living avatars of the winds of magic, created to fight chaos, and Nagash is explicitly stated to dwarf even ancient terrors like Be'lakor. Nagash then goes even further by devouring the Necrohara, god of death. With that act, Nagash replaces the god of death and becomes something fundamentally beyond every other incarnate. During the end times, he defeats greater demons, annihilates demon armies, and overpowers legendary figures like Cetra in direct combat. By this point, Nagash is explicitly stated to be the strongest incarnate in the setting, so every incarnate at this point is weaker than him. That means Tyrion, Malekith, Alariel, Gelt, Thorgrim, and debatably Grimgor are beneath him. Even named greater demons like Kabanda are shown to be comparable or relative to him at best, which says more about how cracked greater demons are in fantasy than it does about Nagash's limits. The only beings who are consistently shown to scale above him are Archaon the Everchosen, the champion of all 4 Chaos Gods, as well as Sigmar Reborn, Lord Croak, and Mazdamundi. Lord Croak, whose feats show him to be on a level that may place him at the top of the end time scaling as he's a leftover instrument of the old ones, and is shown to be able to casually delete greater demons and chaos armies on a continental scale, while technically being dead. Sigmar Reborn would also rank above Nagash, as he was able to outright defeat Kabanda, who appeared relative to Nagash, as well as fight Archaon and defeat the Everchosen. Mazdamundi over Nagash is a bit more debatable. He has undeniable planet-altering feats, moving mountain ranges, and collapsing continents. However, unlike Croak, Mazdamundi lacks consistent god-slaying or incarnate-dominating feats during the end times. Because of that, I'd personally place him in a maybe tier, able to contest with Nagash depending on circumstances, preparation, and battlefield conditions, but not clearly or consistently superior. In summary, Nagash is stronger than all the incarnates during the end times, and is probably relative to the named greater demons of the setting, like Karos Fateweaver and Kabanda, who had previously defeated 3 other incarnates. That means Nagash in this form scales below Archaon the Everchosen and Lord Croak, as well as Sigmar Reborn. So the final scaling is this, folks. Human Nagash sits at the peak of mortal spellcasters in the High Wizard tier, but below Greater Demons. Lich Nagash stands at the very top of the Greater Demon tier, able to threaten entire lands alone, but not quite End Times level. And then finally, End Times Nagash surpasses every incarnate and rivals the greatest demonic entities in existence, but is still probably below Archaon, Sigmar Reborn, Lord Croak, and maybe Mazdamundi. From ambitious priest to undead god king to the living embodiment of death, Nagash only ever climbs higher. What a skull daddy. So yeah, that's my power scaling take on Nagash and where he actually scales in Warhammer Fantasy. This is my first analysis on the setting, so if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and drop a comment letting me know if you want to see more fantasy content, or more specifically, which character you would like to see next. I'm absolutely down to do more of this, maybe even Age of Sigmar farther down the line, though 40k will always be the main focus on this channel. Shout out my YouTube and Patreon members: Impossy Paul, Nathan, Musty, Keedry, Nico149, Omar, Musty Lawyer, Omar A28, Seth Capazilla, and Dean Goldberry. I appreciate each and every one of you, and as always, my favorite beloved herd, stay milked, and I'll see you in the next installment of Power Scaling Bips. Take care now, and don't let the Skull Daddy get ya. He'll turn you into a zombie and leave you doing yard work for hours.
No. Wait. Wait.